This short passage vividly depicts a profound and lasting tension. The activist engaged with the world and the contemplative who spends time in study and worship. Love for God, love for people. The two great commandments, not in opposition, but sometimes in tension. Here we see it in the two sisters, Martha, a people server, and Mary, a God worshiper. Martha meets God through serving others. Mary loves people out of her devotion to God. I'm going to be reading from Luke 10, verses 38 to 42. Now, as they went on their way, he entered a certain village, where a woman named Martha welcomed her into her home. She had a sister named Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. So she came to him and asked, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me. The Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her. So let's just contrast Martha and Mary in this scene. And I'm just going to ask, what can you affirm about each of them? With which character do you identify? First of all, we can see with Martha, Martha wants to honor and serve Jesus and his community. Martha goes to Jesus when she is at the end of her resources, but Martha is rude to Jesus and fails to honor him. Mary, she wants to listen to Jesus and learn from him. The men would gather and the women would serve in the kitchen. Mary is sitting with the male disciples, perhaps taking a social risk. Jesus affirms and defends her, taking her seat at the feet of the rabbi. This is recorded as Martha's home. She was taking responsibility for hosting Jesus. Mary, likely the younger sister, was not responsible for this evening, and had Martha not turned to look at Mary's choice with a combination of impatience and envy, this evening might have gone very differently. Perhaps the meal details weren't going very well, and all of Martha's preparation had been insufficient due to the size of the crowd or unforeseen issues with cooking the meal. It's hard to fault Martha for being overwhelmed trying to feed Jesus and his entire band of disciples. Anytime Jesus showed up for a meal, he brought a crowd. It could overwhelm anyone. Martha's intention was only to honor her Lord. If things had gone differently in the kitchen, there would have been no need for Mary to step in. But also, if Mary had made different choices, Martha would never have needed to interrupt Jesus. If Mary had stood at the edge of the room, leaning against the wall near the doorway, as if indicating that she was an observer to Jesus' teaching, but one who didn't actually belong in the room, not as actual disciple, Mary was paying attention to Jesus, but she was ready to join Martha in the kitchen with a simple tap on her shoulder. Mary might then have heard only a part of Jesus' teaching before being silently drawn into the dinner prep. Or if Mary, seated but still on the edge of the room, could be distracted by her sister's hand-waving gestures attempting to get her attention, then no doubt she would have popped up as she often had before and taken her rightful place by the stove or chopping the vegetables. But Mary was not on the edge or easily distractible. She was seated at Jesus' feet, her eyes focused on his face, her ears tuned to his word, her mind engaged by the stories and the teaching. Mary was engaged in the work of discipleship, a disciplined learning. Certainly, we can expect Martha's rude interruption to Jesus was the last of a series of less intrusive attempts silently to distract Mary from her intention to listen to and learn from Jesus. After all, previous efforts were in vain. I imagine that Jesus and perhaps some of the other disciples may have noticed Martha's antics. Mary, while trying not to remark on them out of politeness. While Martha intended to honor her Lord, she became rude to Jesus out of her frustration with Mary. Martha calls Jesus Lord, but then one, accuses him of not caring, and two, orders him to order Mary to help. She has read Jesus' seeming inattentiveness to her service as insensitive and lacking care. Jesus is sensitive to her real needs and therefore calls her to repent. Martha's exasperated outburst to Jesus in verse 40 is a picture of prayer when we are frustrated. Of course, Martha's was not a great prayer because she made assumptions about Jesus that weren't true. But at least she did pray. When in her desperation she reached out to him, even rudely, that is when he could help her. She prayed for help in one area, ordering her sister around, and he gave her the more fundamental help she needed. Now, this is not a very positive example of ministry. It's an example of ministry as Martha views it as her job description. She is trying to serve Jesus. Martha is so distracted trying to serve Jesus that she misses Jesus' teaching and the one thing that was necessary. She, at this moment, comes to distrust Jesus and resent her sister. She failed in this moment at loving God and loving people. So yes, Martha fails in a big way when she is rude to Jesus and jealous of her sister. But Jesus' response to her is extraordinarily patient and kind while not giving her the relief she seeks. He says her name twice. not in exasperation, or so it seems, but in affection, compassion. He has indeed noticed that she has been distracted by many things. He has noticed and does care. But rather than challenging Mary's superior choice, he's compassionately challenging Martha's inferior one. By one reckoning, Mary was more selfish and Martha was more of a servant. If people were to have food to eat, it would be from Martha's hands, not Mary's. Yet in Martha's serving, she became demeaning and demanding, dishonoring the one she was working so hard to honor. Jesus supports Mary's better choice, though he doesn't force Martha to choose as Mary did. One way to see this story is as I described it at the beginning of this chapter, a story with two characters, an activist and a contemplative, with the apparent application, which are you? And that is certainly a valid question. But another way to see this story is as two pictures of our relationship with God. Both Martha and Mary direct their actions toward Jesus. Martha prays, "Do you not care?" Then she asks Jesus to solve her problem, as she thinks it should be solved. Yes, that was rude, but at least to her credit, she did pray. Jesus, compassionate, patient Jesus, absorbs her rudeness and responds supportively. "I have noticed you. I do care, but I want better for you than frustration and impatience, envy and rancor. I want you to have what Mary has." Martha could have received this as an invitation to take her seat in the room, seated next to Mary, attentive to Jesus. For Mary had decided that the way she could honor Jesus this night is to sit at his feet, a familiar posture for Mary, and to listen attentively to his words as Jesus taught about compassion, forgiveness, or not judging others. Mary heard Jesus teaching and likely had her heart softened toward her sister, with whom tension was familiar. But Martha, in her distraction, heard little of Jesus' teaching while her heart grew impatient with her sister. In our prayer lives, we can be tempted to be more Martha, telling Jesus what to do and wondering if he really cares, and less Mary, listening attentively to Jesus' words, really giving them attention in a way that they affect our heart attitudes toward God and others. Assess your own prayer life for a dangerous Martha-like attitude. First of all, resentment of others. The activist is susceptible to thinking that they alone care, they alone hear the cries of the poor, they alone, among their friends, see the need of the moment. Secondly, resentment of God. The activist wonders if Jesus cares. Does God hear? "How long, O Lord?" And finally, distracted and discontent. The activist sees many things, but perhaps only a few or just one is needed. Pay attention when your busyness or ministry doesn't contribute to your contentment. It's interesting that in this short scene, Mary never faced the question of whether she should get up and help her sister or seemingly selfishly stay listening to Jesus. That is because she was so focused on Jesus that Martha's attempt to distract her and pull her away did not work. Eventually, Martha needed to go through Jesus to get to Mary. But Jesus is like a bodyguard for Mary, with Martha representing the threats and demands of the world that attempt to get their hands on Mary to distract and oppress her. Mary is so close to Jesus and focused on his words and teaching that the world's demands have to go through Jesus, and he is tough enough not to let them get her. So position yourself close to Jesus and pay sufficient attention to his word. Be more like Mary. Finally, I just want to ask a couple of questions for reflection. First of all, how are we distracted by many things? How do those distractions keep us from listening to Jesus or hearing his voice? And secondly, what choices can we make to be more Mary and a little less Martha in our own prayer lives? Thank you for watching this video. Please, if you did like it, please indicate so, like it, and subscribe to my channel. It really helps me. I like to get the word out about these videos. And if you know someone who might also appreciate this, please forward on the link. Thank you.